So welcome to the Grassroots webinar for the month of October. Tonight we're going to be talking about how to recognize lower body fouls. A couple of months ago we focused on upper body fouls. A lot of the key principles will be the same. However, we'll be talking about how to focus our attention on the lower part of the body and what interactions to look for from players to know that we need to call a foul or know when not to call a foul. As usual, we'll have a little bit of instruction, and then we'll have some video analysis, and I will leave time at the end for questions. Again, if you have any questions, please use the chat feature. We already had one person use the Q&A feature. I will not respond to questions on the Q&A feature. Please only use the chat feature. So moving forward, we're going to talk about two things, the FIFA considerations, and then some practical considerations for how to recognize lower body fouls in particular. So we'll start with the considerations. Things to be thinking about when you see contact to help you decide if a foul is necessary to be called. So first is, does the player show a lack of attention or consideration when making the challenge? This is most commonly seen when a player tries to go through a body to get to the ball. Particularly at the grassroots level, players are not often coached that defending is not always just winning the ball. Sometimes it's just holding up play and forcing it in a certain direction. And so players oftentimes feel like they have to try to win the ball if they are defending. And oftentimes, if there is the body of the attacker between themselves and the ball, they will attempt to go through it, through the body of the player to get to the ball. And that's where we look for, are they showing a lack of attention or consideration when making the challenge? Are they thinking about the fact that there's a player's body between them and the ball that perhaps would be impacted if they try to make a challenge on the ball? So is that player showing a lack of attention or consideration when making that challenge? Does the player act without precaution when making the challenge? Again, are they throwing themselves into a tackle, not really knowing where the ball is going to be, not really knowing where the other players are going to be? Are they just jumping into a tackle of some kind without any precaution of the or awareness of the players around them and whether or not they can actually play the ball? Does the player make fair or unfair contact with the opponent after touching the ball? This is a big one that we're going to focus on tonight on a couple of different screens that we look at today. But it's important to note, unfair contact is unfair contact regardless of whether or not they played the ball first or not. So this consideration directly from FIFA means, does the player make fair or unfair contact with the opponent after touching the ball? If it's fair contact we allow. If it is unfair contact, meaning the contact is not something we want to see in the game, it doesn't matter if they touch the ball first, it's going to be a foul. Touching the ball first does not automatically give you free rein to make any further contact with the opponent in an unfair manner. So again, natural contact that happens as a result of a slide tackle, no problem. If we have studs hitting the leg anywhere, if we have studs hitting the Achilles, if we have, generally speaking, unfair contact, it doesn't matter if they played the ball. We need to call a foul here. And we'll see a couple of examples of that when we get to the video analysis portion of the evening. Does the player act with complete disregard of the danger to his opponent? So again, this is just another consideration. Is the player, when he's going to make a challenge, not thinking at all about the potential for disregard to the opponent? Particularly, are they potentially going to injure them? And again, we'll see a couple of tackles tonight when we look at the videos of situations where not much contact actually ends up happening, but the tackle itself was made with a complete disregard to the potential for danger, and so therefore we need to call a foul. Remember that the laws do say we can call fouls for tripping or attempting to trip, kicking or attempting to kick. There doesn't have to be physical contact for us to call a foul. If a challenge is made in a way that is disregarding the danger of the opponent or without precaution, we don't have to actually have there be contact for a foul to be called. The laws don't require physical contact for a foul to be called. Additional considerations. Does the player act with a complete disregard to the consequences of the opponent? That's very similar to the last one when we're talking about danger. But if a player makes a challenge that basically pays no attention to the opponent or the potential danger or injury to an opponent, we definitely want to call a foul, regardless of if any contact is actually made. So sometimes we'll see a player come at high speed, studs out, 2-footed tackle, and they tackle through the ball. The player jumps out of the way, and we think, well, because no contact was made, it's not a foul. That's not true. If a player comes through a tackle really, really hard, studs out, both legs locked, high speed, and a player gets out of the way because they're worried about their safety, we don't want to let challenges like that go in the game. We do want to call fouls in those situations. So challenges that are committed without a regard for the consequence of the opponent, we need to go ahead and call fouls there. Does the player have a chance of playing the ball in a fair manner? Again, this comes back to what I started with. Is there an opposing player between the player committing the challenge and the ball? Is there any chance that that player can actually get to the ball in a fair manner? If there's not, and they go ahead and commit the challenge anyway, we probably are going to need to call a foul there. So you'll see a lot of this if you're understanding these considerations. A lot of these considerations have to do a lot with what happens before the challenge is made, not just when the challenge is made. So for us to be able to know if a player is committing a foul, we have to be seeing ahead of time, does a defender have a fair chance to get to the ball? Is there any potential danger to a player with the tackle that they're about to make? So recognizing when a foul occurs is actually starting ahead of the challenge and recognizing moments of play where a defender doesn't actually have the ability to fairly play the ball or to play the ball in a safe manner. And recognizing those situations helps you to know what to look for so that when a player does commit a tackle, you can know, yeah, you shouldn't have committed that tackle, and you're going to call a foul. Is the challenge putting an opponent in a dangerous situation? We've covered that one a bit. And does the player touch the ball after making contact with the opponent? It's important to note that if there is unfair contact, regardless of it's before or after, we're going to call a foul. But if there's natural contact between the players that happens after the ball is played, that is fine. If the contact happens before the ball is played, it's going to be a foul. Anytime there's contact between players, the only time you're not going to call a foul is if the ball has been played first. If the contact happens before the ball is played by the person committing the challenge, you're going to have a foul there because we require the players to actually make contact with the ball first. We have a question here. What if the hard slide in the box but no contact made? Is it a PK? Again, we have to be very discerning, but the answer would be yes. If a player comes flying through and commits a really, really reckless or dangerous tackle but doesn't play the ball, absolutely, we are going to call a PK there. But again, you need to be discerning in that. If someone tries to make a slide tackle and just misses and there's nothing particularly dangerous about it, then no, we don't need to call a foul there. But generally speaking, the threshold that I normally use is if the nature of the tackle would have hurt a player or would have earned the player some sort of misconduct for the reckless or excessive force nature of the challenge, but they don't make any contact with the opponent, it's still going to be a foul. So I think in the penalty area, that's a good threshold to use, is if you would have given a yellow card or a red card for the tackle, had they made contact and they just happened to miss the player, then absolutely you can give a PK there. But just be very, very discerning in doing so, particularly if they play the ball. It needs to be a pretty egregious foul. I would say if you're going to call a penalty kick for a tackle for which there's no contact with the opponent, it's probably going to be such a severe tackle that you probably would have sent the player off for either serious foul play or violent conduct. Anything short of that, I'd be very careful about calling a penalty kick when no contact has happened. Good question, though. Any questions on these considerations before we move on to some of the video analysis? Question here, do you still caution the player? Absolutely. If a player commits a reckless challenge, regardless if they play the ball or not, you are going to have a yellow card. A reckless challenge is a reckless challenge. If they come flying through a tackle, the most common one we see, I think, is the two-footed tackle where all the contact is with the ball, but it's, you know, two-footed, it's straight leg, there's a lot of force. That's absolutely a reckless challenge, regardless if they play the ball or not. Absolutely, we are still going to give a yellow card. Again, folks, there's some of you submitting questions through the Q&A feature. I will not be answering questions through the Q&A feature. Only ask your questions through the chat feature. Any other questions on the considerations that we went through? Okay, then I will go ahead and move us on to some of the other practical considerations. Again, I want to emphasize this. Playing the ball first doesn't matter. If a player commits a tackle that way win the ball, but then they make unfair contact with the opponent, it still needs to be a foul. And what I would do is I would actually memorize this consideration. I'm going to go back to it here for a second. This consideration number 3, I'm going to leave it up on the screen, and I would ask you to write it down or take a screenshot or take a picture of it. This is the most important sentence for you to be able to repeat when you call a foul when the player actually plays the ball first. Because if somebody wins the ball and then there's unfair contact afterwards and you blow the whistle, you're going to have a lot of protests because not a lot of coaches and players recognize that you can still be called for a foul for making unfair contact after playing the ball. And so what I would do, and what I do myself when I still referee, is when I call this kind of foul, a player has won the ball but then follows through and makes unfair contact, my response to them is, the law says you are guilty of a foul if you make unfair contact with the opponent after touching the ball. If you repeat that sentence specifically, usually more often than not, it will shut the players down and they won't continue their dissent of your decision. So again, take a moment and write this sentence down, because when a player or a coach protests, what we want to say in that moment is the player made unfair contact with the opponent after playing the ball. The law say that's a foul. Quick, simple, move on from it. Any other questions? Again, please use the Q&A feature, or not, excuse me, do not use the Q&A feature, use the chat feature if you have any additional questions. Okay, then moving us along, get out of these considerations. We mentioned playing the ball first doesn't matter. Let's make sure we are careful about that. Unfair contact is unfair contact regardless of playing the ball. So we had a question here, can we describe other kinds of unfair contact? We're talking about lower body fouls right now. And so the most common unfair contact you're going to see is a follow through of the tackle that involves the studs somehow making contact with an opponent. That's going to be the most common one. If someone slides, does a hook tackle or something like that, and the player falls over their body, no problem, perfectly legal. They've played the ball, and the rest of the contact is the result of the other player running or moving through the challenge. The kinds of challenges we want to look for are the ones where there's a follow through after the ball has been played, and they either trip the opponent, they put the studs into the legs of the opponent. For upper body fouls, sometimes you'll see a player kick the ball away but then follow through and put a shoulder into the opponent really hard. Any kind of hip challenges, you see a lot of that in the women's game, where they'll kick the ball away and then follow through with their hips and knock a player down. That kind of contact that you would deem to be unfair to the game, regardless of the ball gets played, we want to call fouls there. And then lastly, and this is the other big point for lower body fouls, we have to pay very, very close attention to who initiates the contact. And again, you'll see this with a couple of the challenges we see later tonight in the video analysis, but who actually creates the contact? If the attacking player has the ball and the defender slides into the attacking player and makes contact, then that's the defender making contact and we might have a foul. but you have to stop and think, if a defender has their body and doesn't move from a position and an attacker runs into them, the attacker actually creates that contact, not the defender, and it would be unfair to punish the attacker when the defender, or excuse me, it would be unfair to punish the defender when the attacker actually created the contact. The defender didn't do anything wrong. So oftentimes, again, we have to be watching the actions of the players before a challenge happens to know whether or not a certain player has actually initiated contact. So again, pay very, very close attention to who creates the contact. If a defender is just standing there and the attacker runs into them, we should not punish a defender for something that the attacker created. So pay really, really close attention to that in the video analysis. We have question here, unnatural or deliberate contact after a tackle. We have to be careful with the word deliberate. Intent is irrelevant most of the time in most of our decision making. Don't judge the intent unless you're looking at violent conduct. Really only judge what actually happens. So let's not worry about whether contact is deliberate or not unless we have a violent conduct where they're stomping on someone or they're deliberately throwing the arm out to the side, et cetera, et cetera. We had a question here, without VAR, how is it possible to minutely look for tripping when the defender has played the ball first and contact was unavoidable, assuming both players went for the ball? It's a very good question, and that's part of what this training is about. We want to train your eyes for what to be looking for before it happens. And so a lot of the times if a player is dribbling the ball and the ball's on the ground, we know that there's probably going to be potential for a lower body foul. And so we want to be watching the legs of the defender who's going into a challenge. So for example, if the ball's on the ground and the player is running up to make a challenge on the ball, it's very doubtful that we're going to have an upper body foul in a scenario where the ball's on the ground. That just doesn't happen that frequently. Sometimes you get a shoulder-to-shoulder challenge, but usually you can see those coming based on reading play and recognizing the nature or the manner in which the defender is approaching the player. If the defender is approaching and starting to get low to ground, then you know that there is probably going to be a slide tackle of some kind, and that's where you want to focus your attention. If a player is running and taking a body posture like they're going to run a shoulder into a shoulder, now you know you need to focus your attention on the upper body and watch carefully for what happens at the upper body. So part of it is just reading play and using your football understanding to know what kind of challenge for the ball is about to happen, and then focusing your attention really, really carefully at the position of where the ball is and where the legs are when you have a lower body challenge. And then part of it is, again, just that football understanding of did one player go out of their way to make contact? So if the ball is straight ahead, did the attacker run off to the side to try to create contact with the defender? Did the defender go out of their way to try to create contact with the attacker? Those are the kinds of things that you have to be looking for. We have a question here. If a defender is standing still and the attacker runs into her, what is the criteria for obstruction? Obstruction doesn't exist. There's nothing in the laws of the game called obstruction. So that's not something we want to be looking for. Again, if a defender is just standing there and literally doesn't move and an attacker runs into them, we should not call a foul on a defender. However, if a defender steps to the side to create a barrier for a player who's trying to run past them, now we have a player who has created contact by stepping to the side. So again, this is where we have to be able to anticipate the kinds of challenges and look for the actions that create the physical contact. Because again, if a defender stands there and just literally doesn't move and the attacker runs into them, we don't want to call a foul there. But if an attacker is trying to run past the defender and the defender steps to the side and moves at all to create that contact, now we do have a foul, and we're going to have charging or tripping or holding or something of that nature. So as a comment that Ian here made, all players have a right to their position on the field. That is correct. Being in the way of an opponent is not the same as moving into the way of an opponent. Very, very excellent verbiage there. Any other questions on this idea of who initiates contact before we dig into the videos? We had a question here, excessive force shoulder to shoulder. I don't know that that really exists. The use of the word excessive force usually has to do with a serious foul play tackle, or is used in combination with excessive force that endangered the safety of an opponent. Usually a shoulder-to-shoulder contact is not going to endanger the safety of an opponent and is going to be considered reckless. So shoulder-to-shoulder contact, usually excessive force, is not something we're going to use. Couple more questions here, give me a moment. Is there any call on blocking the attacker screening while the ball is rolling out for a goal kick? If the ball is in playing distance, then a player is able to shield an opponent from getting to the ball as long as the ball is in playing distance. Again, we're getting into some upper body foul discussions here, but generally speaking, screening a player from the ball is legal as long as the ball is in a reasonable playing distance. So that usually means a yard or two. If they're within a yard or two of the ball, then absolutely we are able to screen them from getting to the ball. If the ball is a long ways away and they're making an effort to not allow a defender or an attacker to run past them, then absolutely that's going to be a foul, but that's going to be charging of some kind, not obstruction. I'm going to repeat, obstruction is not in the laws of the game. That is not a thing. What is it called if it's not in playing distance? That's where we have charging, we can have holding, we can have any number of things, but it's not obstruction. Any other questions? Yes, the terminology impeding is in the laws of the game. Any other questions? Great. Then we'll move along to some video analysis of different kinds of lower body challenges. I will put these videos up on YouTube later on, but I will give you the moment of truth as well for these. So again, we're watching here. There is a replay of this one, so let's just hang tight for a second. And here is the replay. So as you can see here, the ball is gone, and then the opponent makes contact. This is a good example of, even if the player wins the ball here, this kind of contact to the ankles with the studs is what we would consider to be unfair. We don't want to see people jumping into ankles like this. This is a good example of contact that is unfair, regardless if they play the ball first or not. So if this player in blue here had actually played the ball and then this contact happened, this is what we would consider to be unfair contact, and we would want to see a foul called here, regardless if the player wins the ball or not. So if this player wins the ball first and then we have this kind of contact, studs into a foot and ankle area, we absolutely want to have a foul called here. So a good example of unfair contact after the ball is played. Question here, would you caution him with a yellow card? Yes, this would be considered a reckless challenge, and we would want to have a yellow card here. Moving on to another example. There will be a replay. But as you can see here, the purple player does actually play the ball. So now when we move forward to the replay, let me find it. The thing to watch here is there contact before the ball is played? And as you can see here, the purple player actually hits the outside of the red player's foot before kicking the ball away. And so this is a perfect example of the kind of foul where the opponent makes contact with the attacker before playing the ball. As a result, we would want to call a foul here. So if the player goes in to commit a challenge on the ball and makes contact with the opponent before playing the ball, we have to call a foul. So this is a good example of a play where it looks like she kicks the ball away, but in fact goes through the foot to make the contact. We would want to have a simple foul called here. No misconduct is necessary. There's nothing reckless about it. But as you can see, oops, she comes in to try to kick the ball and instead goes through the foot of the attacker first, which is why we would want to call a foul. Another example.
Here we'll see recovery effort. It's all ball, and then after the fact, Grasso runs into.
One more time, and then I'll do it in slow motion for you with a freeze frame.
See recovery effort. It's all ball, and then after the fact, Grasso runs into.
So the key thing about this clip is they're running together. This is a perfect scenario where you can tell by the way the player's approaching that this is going to be a lower body challenge. She's not coming in from the side to try to use her upper body. She reaches in. So at this moment right here, she actually tips the ball away. She makes contact with the ball first. But then her follow through causes her to put her foot directly onto the ankle of the opponent and then onto the top of the foot as well. So that is contact that we would consider to be unfair. And even though she has won the ball first, we would want to call a foul here for making unfair contact with the opponent's leg after the ball is gone. And again, what makes this unfair is the fact that the blue player's foot steps onto the foot and ankle of the red player. If she hadn't stepped on her and instead the red player had gone through the side of the leg of the blue player and then tripped, perfectly legal contact. This has to do with who initiates the contact. So again, in this scenario, the blue player touches the ball away fairly, but then creates additional contact with the opponent on the leg and the ankle. If this scenario is different, meaning the player here kicks the ball away, puts her foot on the ground, doesn't touch the opponent, and then the red player, as she's running past, creates contact with the planted leg of the blue player, we would consider that to be fair contact, and we would not call a foul because the red player actually created the contact with the planted leg of the blue player. But in this case, because the blue player actually initiates the contact onto the body of the red player, we want to call a foul here. Any questions on why this is a foul? I'm getting questions about misconduct. We're not focused as much on misconduct right now as we are why this is actually a foul. So does anybody have questions on whether or not this should be a foul? Again, I want to make sure we understand the difference between fair contact and unfair contact. What makes this unfair is that the blue player steps on the ankle of the opponent and initiates that contact. Again, if the ball gets tipped away and the blue player just puts her foot on the ground and there's no contact, and then this right leg of the red player goes through it and she trips as a result, we would not want to call a foul there. But this step on the ankle, absolutely, we want to have a foul called. So I have a question here. If she didn't step on the foot, but the knee obstructs the red player, I'm again going to repeat what I just said a minute ago. Obstruction is not a thing. Obstruction doesn't exist. If she puts her foot down on the ground after playing the ball and the red player creates contact with it, that is the red player's fault, not the blue player's fault. Therefore, we would not call a foul on the red player. The only thing that makes this a foul is the fact that she steps on the ankle. And yes, we had somebody comment, this is a really difficult one to pick up in real time. That's correct. This is a difficult foul to pick up. But again, this is where if you know that a lower body challenge is going to come, which everything about the body language of this blue player suggests, she's not running up and trying to make side-to-side contact. She's going from the front. She's lunging in. This tells you everything you need to know that this is going to be a lower body challenge. Now you can focus your attention solely downward and look to pick up the follow through. And you can see it right here. The player steps on the ankle, follows through. This is one we can catch. And if there's any hint there, the player goes down holding her leg immediately, which is a good sense of something happens. Question here, what if the blue player plants her foot in the ground, but the knee follows through the red player's knee, no foot to foot, just no ankle to ankle? We would not have a foul there. Two players' legs coming together is not a foul. A player stepping on someone, that is unfair contact. So again, that's why I said earlier, a lot of what you're going to be looking for is, or do the foot or the studs make contact with somebody? That's going to be the most common one. If the ball goes away and legs just get tangled up a little bit while both feet are on the ground, we're not going to have a foul there. But if a player's studs follow through into an opponent, we're definitely going to have a foul. Moving along to the next one. This one's a little harder to see on the video. Play it through one more time. This is another good example of a challenge being committed without precaution to the opponent. So as the ball bounces, the blue player here comes through and kicks the ball, but then jumps into his opponent as he kicks the ball. And he jumps in, and you can't see very well here, but if you could see it on a more clear screen, he actually puts his foot and knee into the stomach and sort of general pelvic area of the player. This is a challenge that has been committed without precaution to the opponent. Yes, the player kicks the ball away first, but does it while jumping without precaution into the opponent. There also could possibly be a yellow card here for a reckless challenge. But the key factor here is that this player kicks the ball away and then jumps into the opponent. This kind of contact with an opponent where the legs and the feet and the studs are up into the sort of midsection of the opponent, we would not consider to be fair play. And so even though they've kicked the ball away, it doesn't give them license to jump into the opponent like that. So we would want to call a foul on this one. We had a good comment here. Ball first plus unfair contact equals foul. Ball first and then fair contact equals no foul. That's accurate, yes. So in this one here, again, the nature of this challenge is the player jumping into the opponent after kicking the ball. Following through with the studs into the midsection, definitely something we don't want to allow in the game, regardless if contact is made with the ball or not. Another example. So this is an excellent example of a situation where we do not want to call a foul. As you can see here, the player kicks the ball, and then the blue player follows through and creates contact. So again, we know these two players are going to go for the ball with their feet, so we want to focus our attention downward. Player kicks the ball, perfectly natural motion. And now, as you can see, it's the blue player running through this challenge and making contact with the leg of the red player that causes the blue player to go to ground. If the blue player doesn't run into the red player, the blue player won't fall down. So this is clearly a ball just cleared. It's not even really a challenge in that it's just a clearance. And in the follow through of kicking the ball, the leg is out to the side, perfectly normal. Studs are free and clear, have not made contact with an opponent at all. And then the blue player, in her perfectly legitimate reason for trying to get to the ball, runs and makes contact with the back of the calf of the player here in white and red and goes to ground as a result of it. We would have no foul here for either player. This is normal, fair contact between two people trying to get to a ball. And so therefore, we would not want to call a foul. So again, in real time, kicks the ball away, player goes to ground. This is not a foul against either player. The red player puts their leg out to clear the ball, so she can expect the blue player to run into her a little bit. The blue player has not done anything wrong. This is a perfect example of fair contact after a ball has been played. We do not want to call a foul here. Any questions on that one? Leon, that's not a question. The referee did call a foul in this scenario and was corrected by pro. This is not a foul. Okay, moving us on then.
Pieces in a game that has been so tightly contested, boy, they could be a big difference. Heath will come away with this one.
So the foul on this one, or excuse me, the challenge on this one happens just directly outside of the screen here, right here. And we're not going to worry about it right now because there's a replay that really helps us with this one. So I'm going to let it play for a second. And now I'm going to move us forward to the replay so you can see what really happened. So again, we're going to look at these two players right here. So as you can see, as the play moves in that direction, we've got a red player with the ball in playing distance, shielding her opponent from the ball in a legal manner. The red player has not initiated any contact here. The red player is simply holding her ground, waiting for the ball to get to her feet. As this play happens, the blue player tries to get past her, and the blue player creates contact to the back of the red player's leg. So the blue player in this situation is actually the one who creates the contact by trying to go through the red player to get to the ball. And as a result of trying to go through the red player, ends up tripping, getting caught in an awkward position, and falling and actually hurting herself a little bit. So the question here is this a foul on the red player? And the answer to that is no, because again, as you can see in the slow motion here, the red player is simply holding her ground, positioning her body to receive the ball, when the blue player initiates contact to the back of the leg. So if it weren't for the blue player trying to get to win the ball and going through the red player, there would have been no contact. The blue player would not have fallen down. But because the blue player took an action that caused her to fall over the red player, we do not want to call a foul against the red player on this one. Because as you can see, the blue player creates the contact with the red player, goes to ground awkwardly, and hurts herself. Question here, foul on blue player. Let's see if we want to call a foul here. Would you want to stop the game here for a foul? The answer to that is no. So if the blue player had actually tripped this red player and forced her to go to ground by making contact with the back of the legs, then yes, absolutely we would have a foul. But in this scenario, the red player successfully holds her ground, receives the ball, turns, and continues. We don't need to stop play here. No foul from either player. Any questions on this clip? Great. Ooh, we did have a question. Give me just a moment. A comment here more than a question. One key takeaway from all the videos is to make a correct call, the referee's positioning is very important. That is correct. You have to be in a proper position to be able to see all the different components of a decision. How is the mode of contact? What is the point of contact? Where is the ball and is the ball played? Those are all key things. And if you're not in a position to see it, you're never going to be able to make a decision. But that's for a different presentation on positioning a different day. Questions here, do you need to wave play on? Nope, there's no reason to wave play on here at all. If you don't blow the whistle, that means there's not a foul. Everybody can move on. Question here, when would you stop play for a player down? The only time, now again, take this with a grain of salt for the grassroots level, the only time we stop play for an injury is if a player has a serious injury. Now, if a player goes to ground, the ball's in the defensive third, and nobody's anywhere near to scoring in a goal, then we're going to go ahead and stop play for a little kid who's on the ground crying. Again, the main thing is we don't want to take away an attacking opportunity from a team to deal with an injury. And in this last clip, if we had stopped the game there for the injured player, we would have been taking away a really good attacking opportunity. So there's a question here, impedes an opponent with contact, regarding that last clip. So remember, impeding can only happen when the ball is not in playing distance. And on this clip, the ball is in playing distance. The other thing you have to remember is who created the contact. The defending player in blue is the one who created that contact. If the player hadn't tried to go through the red player, there would have been no contact. Therefore, we don't want to punish the red player then. Question here, but then would you stop player? When would you stop player for a player down? We only stop play for a player down when it's a serious injury, or if you're in a little kid's game, go ahead and stop the game if there's not a promising attacking opportunity. If you're in an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old's game and somebody falls down and is crying, unless there's a good attack going, just stop the play and let them get checked on. Again, at the end of the day, for little kids soccer in particular, we want to focus on their safety and making sure they're okay. If someone's going down the field with a good attacking opportunity, hold off until that attacking play is over and then go ahead and stop it. But in more competitive soccer, the only time we stop play is for serious injuries or potential head injuries. If anybody seems like they got hit in the head, stop play immediately. It doesn't matter where the ball is. If someone other just goes down but it doesn't look serious, then we don't stop unless it was a head injury. Moving us along to the next clip. So again, this is another example of unfair contact after the ball is played. So we can definitely see as this challenge starts, and I'm going to pause it as we get closer to it. So this is what we would consider a challenge committed without precaution for the player. And again, anytime a player is jumping into a tackle like this where the ball is moving and the player's moving, this player doesn't know where the ball is going to end up. It's too early to know exactly where this ball is going to be, and yet he's still jumping into a challenge. And if you look at the trajectory of his body, he's actually going directly towards the player here. So it's safe to say at this moment, he's going towards the player. The ball, yeah, it's moving across the field, but he has no way to judge exactly where that ball is going to be. And yet he's committing a challenge that has the legs straight, studs exposed, and he goes in with both feet and follows through with both feet in what I would consider to be a very reckless manner. And so regardless of the fact that he plays the ball here, the fact that he has committed a tackle with straight legs, without real precaution for the opponent, because again, you look at the right leg here, it's nowhere near the ball. So this is a challenge that's going more targeted to the player than it is the ball. That the ball happens to be close by, frankly, is irrelevant. This is a situation where, regardless of the fact that he's played the ball, we still want to call a foul here because he's gone through with two straight legs into the opponent in a manner that definitely does not take into consideration the player's safety. So a couple of questions here. Should it be a red card with both legs up? The answer to that is no, because there was not excessive force with this challenge, and the player didn't actually endanger the safety of the opponent here. If he had made solid contact onto the planted leg of this opponent, then absolutely. But as you can see here, both studs actually just go kind of past the player, and therefore no real contact happens. There's actually, it's kind of funny on this one, because he slides through it, the player in white actually takes a foot to the face and ends up being the one that gets hurt. Kind of ironic. But absolutely, this would be a yellow card challenge because he's gone into a tackle that is reckless. He doesn't actually endanger the safety of the opponent because there's not as much force in it, and because he doesn't actually make meaningful contact with the opponent. There needs to be a successful completion of a bad challenge here for this player to be sent off. Because he doesn't actually make significant contact with the opponent, we don't need to show a red card here. We had a question here. Would you issue a caution? Absolutely. We're using the terms studs out, straight leg, two straight legs frequently, determining whether to go yellow card or red card. Again, committing a two-footed tackle by itself is not a red card. It's definitely a yellow card if it happens, but it's not a red card unless significant contact is made with the opponent. There needs to be actual contact with the opponent if you're going to have a red card. If there's no contact, then it's just a reckless challenge and it's yellow. Question here, where are his feet supposed to be? Studs out. The bigger issue is, why is the player actually committing a challenge this way? This is not a challenge that we want to see committed in the game. This player could have slid with his feet back, but that would have been less successful for this player because really at the end of the day, he's trying to get a lick in on this opponent here. He's trying to stick it to this opponent. That's why he commits a tackle like this, because he's trying to make significant contact with the opponent while the ball is close by. At the end of the day, we regularly don't want to see players committing tackles into an opponent with the legs straight out like this. It would have been perfectly reasonable for this player to tuck the legs back and to try to do a tackle that makes contact with the thighs or the shins of the defender making the contact, but instead he leads with the studs, not something we want to have happening in our games. Any other questions on this one? People made a note here, the referee's positioning does not allow him to see this. That is correct. This is not ideal positioning for this. We had a question here, does injury to the opponent determine red card, or could it be red card with excessive contact? The player does not have to, the opponent does not have to be injured for it to be a red card. If the challenge is made with excessive force that endangers the safety of the opponent, regardless if the player gets hurt, then absolutely we want to give a red card. We had a question here, did the referee miss this? It doesn't matter. We're not here to critique a referee's performance or judge a referee's performance. We're here to analyze the nature of a foul. An ideal scenario for the referee would have been to recognize this kind of challenge coming and to adjust his position to be able to see it. Unfortunately, he doesn't at that moment. So the question is, can we use AR or fourth official? The answer to that is yes. Unfortunately, the fourth official is not here. The fourth official is over here, but the AR would have a good view of this challenge, would not have any other decisions to make, and so we would hope that the assistant referee would make this, or at least help with this decision. We had a question here, is there ever a time when a drop ball would be the restart on any of your examples? The answer to that is very clearly no. These are all foul situations. We are not having drop balls when there is a foul committed. A drop ball is only something we do when we restart play after no infraction has occurred. If we have a means to stop play, meaning for an injury or the referee gets hit by the ball and it changes possession, there has been no infraction, which means the only restart is a dropped ball. All the things we're looking at now are infractions by players for which we would have a direct free kick restart. Moving us along to the next clip. Another good example of the nature of a foul. Oh, this one's not wanting to play for some reason. I'm sorry, folks. This one doesn't want to play. So here we are with another one. So I'll play it one more time, and then we'll give you a replay. So in the replay, again, we have a player who goes to ground, commits a sliding challenge, wins the ball here. So absolutely plays the ball away. There is no contact with this opponent before the ball is played. So the player plays the ball away, but then follows through with the studs out, both of them, and makes contact with the leg and the ankle of the opponent. So this is a scenario, again, where we would consider this to be unfair contact after the ball has been played. Because as you can see, she follows through on the tackle and puts both studs into the leg and foot of the opponent. So if she had slid into this tackle and kept her legs tucked back and the studs hadn't made contact with the opponent, no problem whatsoever, no foul. But again, because she follows through with her leg out and puts it into the leg of the opponent, as evidenced by this freeze frame and that freeze frame and that one and that one and that one, these are things that we would consider to be unfair contact, and we would want to have a foul called here. This absolutely needs to be a foul and a yellow card for the nature of this challenge. Again, we'll see one more replay. Good contact there. She wins the ball, no problem. If she'd have tucked her legs back or kept it low after the challenge, no problem. But as you can see, then the leg comes up directly into the shin of the opponent. That is absolutely unfair contact. We don't ever want to see this kind of contact onto the leg of an opponent. And then she follows through with both legs. And as you can see here, makes pretty significant contact with the leg of the opponent. So there was a question here, is it still a foul if the player follows through a little bit with the leg? So again, if the main reason this is going to be a foul is because she keeps her legs stretched out and makes contact with the studs. If she had committed this tackle in a way where she had kept her feet back, and as she made contact with the ball, she slid through the opponent and the contact was with the thighs or a less dangerous part of the body, then no, we probably don't need to call a foul because she has just made a clean tackle and the body has followed through a little bit. But again, because she leaves her studs out and because the studs go into the leg like this, we absolutely need to have a foul called here. And the answer, yes, is this should be a yellow card. The reason this isn't red is because there's not a lot of force in this. This tackle doesn't endanger the safety of the opponent because there's not a lot of force. As you can see, she goes to ground. She's on the ground. She plays the ball, and there's not a whole lot of follow through. You can see she doesn't go much past the player. So the force involved in this challenge means it doesn't need to be a red card, but it is absolutely a yellow card. The force involved here is the key thing. Less if she follows through with the legs or not. This tackle has all to do with the force. We have a question here. What if the referee determines that momentum made her legs go up? She did not mean the unfair contact because she went for the ball and won it. Again, I'm going to ask you not to think about intent. Intent doesn't matter. It's what actually happened that matters. The fact that she went into this challenge in a way where she was not able to control her body and thus created a negative impact on the opponent means she committed this challenge without proper precaution for her opponent. And that is what we want to call a foul. So again, don't get into, oh, she didn't mean to, oh, she just did that, she did that, it was an accident, whatever. None of that matters. She went into this challenge in a way that she could not control her body, which thus means she is not taking the proper precaution for her opponent, which means we're going to have a foul and we're going to have a yellow card for this challenge. Don't get into she didn't mean to or it wasn't, that wasn't her intent. Call what actually happens. Make decisions on what actually happens, not on what you think the player meant to do. That's irrelevant. Any other questions on this clip? Do you want to go back? I don't know why this one's not playing. It's a little frustrating. I apologize. This one's not going to play. So that brings us to the end of our clips. Do we have any additional questions on how to recognize lower body fouls at this point? Do we have any video examples where a player does a slide tackle that involves a relatively straight leg similar to this that wouldn't be a foul? Usually not. No, if somebody goes in jumping into a tackle with a straight leg, more often than not, you're going to have a foul called. More often than not. Again, it has to do with if they're going directly into the player. If they slide across the front of the player with a straight leg but doesn't actually go into the player, then we don't need to call a foul there. But if the direction of the challenge is directly at the opponent with a straight leg, then more often than not, we're probably going to call a foul just to be safe. Question here, if a player trips the other player knee to D, that is fair challenge. No, that is not the case. If they don't play the ball and there is knee-to-knee contact initiated by a defender, then yes, we want to call a foul. If they play the ball away and the two knees come together after the ball gets played away, that's probably not going to be a foul. So again, it has to do with this unfair or fair contact after the ball has been played. Any other questions regarding recognizing lower body fouls? All right, then thank you for joining this evening, and everybody have a great night.